Welcome. So, what really makes a business good? Beyond just turning a profit. And why do some corporate scandals blow up in the headlines while others seem to just disappear? Today, we're going to unpack all of that. We're breaking down the core ideas from the first two chapters of the textbook to give you a super clear and solid guide. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's kick things off with a number that might just stop you in your tracks: 30%. That's how many employees, right here in the US, have personally seen some kind of misconduct where they work. This tells you right away, this isn't some abstract academic topic. Nope, it's a real-world issue that's happening every single day.
But wait, it gets even more concerning. Just look at that last number on the screen. A staggering 53% of people who actually do the right thing and report misconduct face retaliation. Yeah, you heard that right, more than half. And that's not just a statistic, That's people losing their jobs, getting passed over for promotions, or being shut out, all because they spoke up. This is exactly why we need a solid understanding of business ethics. It's about creating systems that actually protect people and encourage them to do the right thing.
So, how do we start to make sense of this pretty complex world? Well, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll take a quick look back in time to see why ethics became such a big deal. Then, we'll get the lingo down so we're all on the same page. After that, we'll meet the key players, the stakeholders. Then, we'll dig into what it really means for a company to be responsible. And we'll wrap it all up with a practical, step-by-step guide on how to actually build an ethical company from the ground up.
First things first, why should we even care about this? Well, to really get why business ethics is so important today, we need to see how we got here.
And this timeline tells the story perfectly. You see, back in the 60s, you had this huge consumer rights movement that really forced companies to think about things like safety. Fast forward to the 80s, and we get this huge idea of stakeholders. We'll talk a lot more about them in a bit. By the 90s, things got more official, with actual federal guidelines. And then came the 2000s, with massive scandals like Enron that led to game-changing laws like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The big takeaway here is that business ethics is never just standing still, it's always changing and evolving based on what society demands and, frankly, where businesses have messed up.
All right, to really get into this, we've got to be speaking the same language. So, let's quickly nail down a few key terms you absolutely need to know.
First up, morals. The easiest way to think about morals is as your own personal compass. It's your internal guide to what's right and what's wrong, based on your own beliefs and philosophies.
Business ethics, then, takes that idea of a compass and scales it up for an entire organization. It's not about what just one person thinks is right. It's about creating a shared set of principles and values that guide how everyone in the company behaves.
So what are these principles? Well, think of them as the specific, universal boundaries for behavior. They're the lines you just don't cross. In business, this could be something like the fundamental right to a safe workplace, or the idea of being truthful in your advertising.
And values? Values are those big-picture ideals that a society or a group agree are important. Things like trust, integrity, accountability. These aren't just personal preferences. They are ideas that we all kind of agree to enforce on each other and our institutions.
Okay, so what happens when these ideas clash? That's when you get a dilemma. A moral dilemma is totally internal. It's you wrestling with yourself. Like, your personal moral of being loyal to a coworker might clash with your moral of being honest if you know they messed up. A value dilemma, on the other hand, is a conflict between those bigger, socially enforced ideals. A company might have a conflict between its value of protecting the environment and its value of providing affordable products. Knowing which one you're dealing with is the first step to figuring it out.
Now that we've got the language down, let's talk about who is actually involved in all of this. In business, they're called stakeholders.
First, you have your primary stakeholders. Think of these as the essential players. Their continued support is absolutely necessary for the company to even survive. We're talking about customers, employees, shareholders, and suppliers. Without them, the business just stops.
And then you have secondary stakeholders. Now, these groups, like the media, the local community, or government agencies, they aren't part of the company's daily transactions. But, and this is a big but, you absolutely cannot underestimate their influence. A single negative news story or a new government regulation can completely change a company's fortunes.
So, once a company recognizes all these different groups it has to think about, it leads to a much bigger question. What do we actually owe them? This is where we move beyond just profit and into the world of social responsibility.
A really great way to think about this is like a pyramid. At the very bottom, the foundation is economic responsibility. A business has to be profitable to survive, period. The next level up is legal responsibility. You got to obey the law. But the best companies, they don't stop there. They climb higher to ethical responsibility, which means doing what's right and fair even if the law doesn't make you. And at the very peak of the pyramid, that's philanthropic responsibility, actively being a good corporate citizen and giving back to the community.
And look, this isn't just about feeling good. Being an ethical company has real, tangible benefits. For starters, employee commitment goes way up. When people feel proud of where they work, they're more creative, more loyal, and turnover goes down. That's a huge win.
It also builds way stronger loyalty with investors. These days, investors see ethical practices as a sign that a company is well-run and less risky. In fact, demand for socially responsible investing is absolutely booming.
And of course, there are the customers. Trust is everything, right? Customers are way more loyal to companies they see as doing the right thing. And a lot of them are even willing to pay more for products from a brand they trust.
This all leads us to a really crucial idea called corporate governance. What is that? Well, you can think of it as the formal system of checks and balances for a company. It's the whole structure of accountability and control that's put in place to make sure the people at the top are acting in the best interests of all the stakeholders, not just themselves.
Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, but how does a company actually do it? How do you make it happen in the real world? Let's walk through a practical framework for putting it all into action.
It really comes down to this clear 6-step process. First, you have to take a hard look at your own company culture. Then you identify all your different stakeholder groups and figure out what issues really matter to them. After that, you assess your own company's commitment, figure out what resources you have and which issues are most urgent. And finally, and this is so important, you create real ways to get feedback from your stakeholders. It's not a one-time thing. It's a constant cycle of listening, assessing, and responding.
And that brings us to the final fundamental question that lies at the very heart of business ethics. It's the one that companies and leaders wrestle with every single day. Who comes first? Is a company's ultimate responsibility just to make as much money as possible for its shareholders? Or does it have a bigger, deeper responsibility to all of its stakeholders, and maybe to society as a whole? There is no easy answer, and exploring that tension is what this entire field is all about.